Good afternoon. It's good to see you all, and I wonder why you have stayed here. You should go. The other seminar will be far, far better. Okay? So this is your last chance to leave. You'll enjoy it better. My name is Colin Highlands. That was my wife that was up earlier. So I work with CEF also. I work in the youth side of CEF. We are obviously a children's ministry, but children grow up, as you know. And so I look at organising the youth ministry throughout the island of Ireland. Based mainly in Northern Ireland, but there's about 60 groups of young people who meet right across Ireland from the very bottom to the very top. And it's great to see some of them actually here today, young people who I've met through Dublin and through Wexford and other places. It's been lovely to see that. What I want to do is to look a little bit at how on earth we are going to minister to teenagers and to young people in a post-pandemic world. Because things have changed a little bit. Let me take you back to the 6th to the 8th of March 2020. You'll see a photograph on the screen. This was a weekend that we had in CEF Ireland, and we had 90 teenagers all together. And the reason I remember is on the very first night we had a table quiz, okay? And we had lots of competitions and games. The first competition was you have to think of a name for your team. So that night, and it's the Irish humour, I know, basically all of the young people, their team was called COVID-19, coronavirus, Chinese virus, and all these other things, and it was all very politically incorrect, okay? They began to make fun and laugh about this silly thing in the news that really didn't affect us. But then the next day, we had free time in the afternoon, and I remember we were in a coffee shop, some of the leaders, standard, and on the news, it appeared on my news feed that the first case of coronavirus had been discovered in a little country village in Northern Ireland. And all of a sudden, it became a lot closer to us. 1 week later, we had our JYC missions rally. And you'll see a slide of this, where we bring all the young people from our JYC groups together, our Junior Youth Challenge groups. Now, I had 50 groups, and I was hoping to have at least 40 of them come, and they were booked in. And one by one, my phone began to ping. Sorry, not coming, not coming. In the end, we had 8 different groups came along. And the reason they came along was because one of the leaders said, we think this might be the last time they'll get to see each other for a little while. You know as well as I do, 3 or 4 days later, we were all sitting watching the television sets as news of lockdowns came in. But sure, it's only going to be for a couple of weeks, isn't it? Well, that's what we thought. To flatten the curve, yeah. Let me take you forward 2 years. 2 years to our Teens Weekend in 2022, where again, we had lots of young people coming together. This is a few weeks ago in one of our centres. A few weeks after that, we were down in that centre that Mervyn showed you a photograph of in Durrow and Portlaoise, and we had another 50 or 60 young people coming together in a great opportunity to spend time. Not only that, but we had our JYC Missions Night the week after, and again, we had lots of young people crammed into a room. So everything's back to normal, isn't it? We can just get on with life, forget the last 2 years happened. Well, I don't really think that's necessarily the case. If you remember back to when the first lockdown came, all of us began to try and figure out what was happening and why it was happening. We began to rationalize why God had allowed it to happen. Was it because we were maybe too busy and needed a quieter time? Maybe was it to expand the work because of online ministry was going on? I regularly heard people, and possibly some of you said this, when things go back to normal, I'm not going to be as busy. I'm not going to do the same amount of stuff. But that's what we said at the beginning, but quickly we began to think about what we're going to do. And for those of you in ministry leadership and youth groups and children's works and pastoring, what do? We began to record WhatsApp videos. We began to record YouTube videos. Many of you are now online stars, that you have your photograph there. People will be able to Google you in years to come and find out more about you. But we began to do more and more. Maybe because of a guilt of missing out. Maybe because we felt we wanted to get things back up and running. And even now, I find with a lot of our workers and other ministry organisations, we're all rushing to get back into things as much as possible. Should we? Well, in one side, yes, we should, because the command has not changed. We're still told to go and make disciples. We're still told to go no matter what, lockdown or no lockdown, no matter what happens. We are told to go and teach God's word, to make disciples, baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. We're told to go. But things have changed. The reality is that things have changed a lot. How? Well, I want to look at 3 things today that have changed, okay? And I'm going to need you to help me at certain points because we have many different parts of Ireland represented in this room. Dublin in itself, there's many different parts, but also further afield. And I'm sure there's people from other countries in this field who are ministering in other places. I know of at least one. So I want you to help me a little bit because the first thing I notice is that you are different post-pandemic, okay? Do not underestimate the impact that the pandemic has had on you. Now, I am not saying that you do not get back into ministry. I'm 100% thinking we should be. I am not saying you should not try and rebuild, but you need to be aware that you are different post-pandemic. So here's the first bit. How are you different? Tell me, how do you find yourself different now after the pandemic? Someone has to start shouting out. This is a seminar, not a... Now, I know some of you. I will call on you. Very back corner. You're a lot more patient. Good. I wish I had that same impact in my life. That is good. Okay, nice. Anyone else? Okay, good. Thanks. Yes, yeah, appreciating. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Very good. Learned a lot of strategies. That's positive. That's very good. I've done the same. When I met you earlier on, you're doing the fist, but you're not sure whether to shake or what to do. Yeah. Okay. Have any of the rest of you discovered that we're so used to wearing masks that our facial expressions, when people did things, we were like, oh, and now we don't have a mask to protect that. And we sometimes forget and we can be quite rude. Yeah. There's quite a few things that are different about us. I'm going to highlight a couple of things that I have discovered. You can disagree. Please come and talk to me afterwards. First thing's this. You will get exhausted a lot quicker, okay? This is the guy who was meant to be at the back. You'll see him later on. This is what his face was, okay? Especially if any of you do residential ministry. So I know I saw Tanya speaking to some earlier about camp leaders. I know Mervin's going to be looking for camp leaders. There's going to be lots of things. If you do residential, you'll be shocked at how tired you get so quickly. And part of it is because we're not used to talking to people as much in the same social interaction and being in the same room. We're also, I think, used to maybe a slightly slower pace of life and getting to sleep maybe a little bit earlier. So when teenagers won't go to bed at 1 a.m., you really don't have the patience that you have gained, and you struggle at that point in time. So I know I have got 2 years older than what I was before the pandemic, but we do find ourselves exhausted a little bit more. Second thing's this, you have a lot more to think about. Okay, so I'm not sure last summer how many of you within churches tried to do ministry. I know many of you tried to do youth ministry and children's ministry in person, but you had to begin to think, do we social distance? Do we shake hands? Do we have sanitizer? Can we do this? Can we not do this? And all of a sudden you begin to think what all will happen, and you begin to think about how to adapt and how to plan. And all of a sudden, instead of just planning for an event, you have to plan for that event if everything's okay. And then this is your plan if something goes wrong. And this is the plan if something else changes, or if restrictions change, or if other things happen. And all of a sudden you begin to change a lot. So for example, Jeff mentioned earlier about the most beautiful county in Ireland, okay? That can be disputed here. But I was going to visit the most beautiful county in Ireland last summer, okay? Up in Rosnila in Donegal. And I was all excited to go to it. I was working with a team of young people. We were going to have a camp. Now, for any of you in ministry, you know how difficult it could be with restrictions last year. So, according to government regulations, we had to camp in tents outside, but we were allowed to eat our meals inside because COVID didn't go there. And we could have our meeting inside, but we couldn't do any activities inside. So, it was navigating all of that. We eventually got it all planned. I was the speaker. I was leading the camp with 50 teenagers. It was so exciting. And the evening before I went, this curse in my life pinged. What was it? Close contact. You have to isolate for 10 days. And the worst bit was I knew the government rules were changing the next week and I wouldn't have to isolate anymore. 10 days, everything changed. And you had to get someone to speak. Well, I still spoke on Zoom, and we had to get someone to lead and all of that. That was the world we lived in and how it changed so quickly. We don't have as much of that, but I do think we still think through things because there are some people who are more sensitive on issues than others, and we have to be aware of that. I'll quickly move on. You may not have processed the impact of the pandemic on you. I don't know your setting. I was at a conference for pastors last November and Christian workers, and there was a speaker at the front, and he said this, and it really resonated with me. He said, for many of us, those who are pastors, those who are youth workers, worship leaders, whatever you are, even volunteer youth leaders, volunteer children's workers, what happened after the pandemic kicked in lockdown? We all began to think about how can we do ministry? We began to go online. We began to think about, can we go for walks with teenagers? Can we phone them? And our minds began to work. We began to use all these strategies, began to learn more about what we could do. And we had to work faster and harder than everyone else. So while most people have struggled and maybe crashed during the pandemic, they now have recovered and gone back. But for those in ministry, they've been still going as much as they possible. In fact, maybe more. And he warned that for a lot of those in ministry, maybe 1 year or 18 months down the line, many will face burnout. Many will face times where they will just struggle. They'll be weary, not off the work, but weary in the work and dropping out as a result of it. And I think we need to be wise and think about that. During lockdown, I began to walk a lot more. I began to walk our dog. Just because you're all in the house together, it's nice to get out. The dog can't speak to you. Okay? You're out walking with the dog all the time. It's my wife. We're out walking all the time, but I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I listen to a lot of football podcasts, not Liverpool. The better side and Merseyside I support. But one of them had an advertisement before by IBM Computers. And they had this little catchphrase. It was this: today's not a restart, it's a rethink. And we need to think about how we do our ministry within our churches. I know many of you are back at it, but we need to think about what we're doing. So, first thing is, you're different, okay? Want to get on to not more important stuff, but where we're going with this. Second thing is this: the young people are different. They are not the same as they were before the pandemic, okay? Now think about it logically, okay? Here's a photograph on the screen of me, my son, and my daughter, okay? My son is 17 years old. My daughter is 14 years old. Losing out on 1 year or 18 months of their life is a bigger impact on them than it is for me as a 46-year-old. I've had a long time, but for them, that's a huge portion of their life. And it has had a big impact on our teenagers. For those of you who have studied about the generations in Generation Z, you will be aware of two things. First thing is this: Generation Z are those who cannot recall life before the tragedies in America, the Twin Towers of 9/11. That was the cutoff point because at that point, life changed for them. The second thing is this: the recession in 2007 and 2008 really impacted the way they think about things. Because for many of them, they saw their parents losing their incomes and their jobs. For many of them, they saw their parents struggle so much at that point in time. They were determined that they would not go through that. And that instead what they would do would be they would make sure they were supported. They would begin businesses. They would do things to try and become independent so that it would never happen to them again. Big world events had impacts on their life. Now think about what we have just gone through. It's been a huge impact on their lives, a huge world event. The pandemic began with this generation. It's their defining moment. They walked out of school in March 2020 expecting to see their friends within 2 weeks. And for many of them, it was months before they were back with their friends. And you can already see some noticeable things in their lives. Like, there's studies still be going on this, but you can already see things that have happened. So tell me, what things have you noticed in young people when they've come back? Or your children even, for some of you? Behavior, yeah. Good or bad? Yep. It's honest. Yep. Excellent. A lot of anxiety. Yep. Finding it hard to meet new people. Exhaustion. Mm-hmm. Withdrawn. Sorry, I just couldn't hear you. Yep. Thank you. Withdrawn. Thank you. Yep. lack of social confidence. Okay? So you guys can come up and do the talk, okay? But 100%, you can see it with your own eyes. I'm going to pick a few things that have been highlighted by studies, but you've already mentioned many of them. The first one is anxiety, which is the big obvious one at the moment. So in America, 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 teenage boys have experienced worsening anxiety since March 2020. Teenagers and young adults are experiencing profound anxiety, and it's impacting what they do and how they do things. So, for example, a few weeks ago in CEF Ireland, we had a conference over Easter time, and a few young people who always would be at our events, and I knew were looking to come to this, refused to come at the last minute. Wasn't just because of social anxiety of not wanting to see people, but the biggest anxiety they faced was because they're very academic and very high achieving, and they had exams coming up shortly afterwards. Now, that can happen at times, okay, where people will worry with that. But this is the first exams that they have done in 2.5 years. And so all of a sudden they're worrying, what happens if I don't get into my course? What happens if I don't get... And these are students who are top level. They're not students who are struggling to get the pass mark, but they were worried about having to reach that standard. And the anxiety meant so much to them. They came one night and I could see on their face a terror. They had to get back home to work again. And I had underestimated how much it impacted their lives. Young people are so anxious because they have been in a position where they had all their hopes and their plans and their dreams all just ripped away from them completely. And it's been highlighted so much, this issue has been highlighted in the media about the anxiety, the mental health issues, all the things that are happening, which is ironic because the media openly will acknowledge that it played its part in heightening fear and developing that. But in many of our schools, we can see this more and more. Teachers, I'm not sure you can tell me what it's like in Dublin or in Wexford or other places, but a number of the teachers I'm aware of, the teenagers are allowed an anxiety pass, where if they feel anxious at any time, they can say, Miss, I need to leave. And they will leave the classroom and they can go see a school nurse or they can go see a counsellor or just have a time for 30 minutes or more where they can breathe and they can just relax. And that's happening regularly in our high schools because they're being so overwhelmed with what's going on. So I don't think we can underestimate the anxiety, okay? So here's some times when there could be anxiety. So coming into a room like this, where you have a large crowd of people. Secret, same conference we were at a few weeks ago. It was the CEF conference. Me and a few others here were going on a trip afterwards to a friend's wedding. So we knew we needed to stay away from people. We did not want to get COVID. We had to have a COVID test before we went. We were terrified. And we walked in the first night of the conference. And there was this amount of people in half the size of a room. And we just looked at each other and we're like, oh no, oh no, what's going to happen? Now that's us, and we joked about it. But some teenagers are still struggling with big groups, and larger groups. You also will find when you're organising events that some of them will withdraw at the last minute. They'll be all enthusiastic about going, and then they'll pull out at the last moment because they begin to think about it and panic and worry. You'll also find, I noticed here today, I'm not highlighting it, but there's no real mask wearing as such. But you'll find in some places people who have been so conscious and so careful wearing masks will be worried about what to do, what not to do. And even with government advice, they will be unsure about offending people, but also unsure what's going on. And you'll see how this will have an impact on them. Young people will be acting nervously. They'll be anxious, they'll be upset. You'll see a lot more depression, unfortunately. And you'll also see this kicking in other areas, because what happens with all of this will it develop into eating disorders, it'll help develop into self-harming and other control issues coming out. And those are things that many of us are not equipped to deal with, but we need to be aware of. We need to be aware that that's there, and then we need to seek proper help for that, to try and help them and encourage them. And there is good stuff out there. There are good organisations who can help with that. And so we need to be aware of all of that. Studies have suggested that the past 2 years are like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, for young people. And trauma is rooted in something that we witness, something that happens to us, or something that's so powerful that it impacts us. And you can see the impact of this in their lives, where young people are finding it difficult to trust others, what you say, or they can be spontaneously triggered with bouts of depression, anxiety, or other things. Now, I know that's a characteristic of teenagers in general, where they do get triggered, they do change moods, where things happen to them, but so much more as a result of the pandemic. Let's move on. Because another thing I've noticed and has been picked up has been that young people have become a lot more questioning. Okay? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking at a high school event, and it was a small Christian union within the school. We're doing a mission week. So they were doing lots of different ideas. They were doing breakfast for students, and they could drop in, and they were speaking to them about the Lord Jesus, or other events that they were doing to try and get people to come. And as you can imagine, there were very few young people came along. But then they did one evening, which was a party night, and they had a huge event in a sports hall, a sports centre they hired, and there were 140 young people came along. It was incredible. They had a huge party, and then they were sending them in for donuts and an ice cream afterwards. But on the way to that, they had to go and sit in a meeting room like this, and I had to speak at them, and they had to listen to me for 15 minutes before they got their food. That's not the bit I wanted to get to. What it was when they got back into the party and they were enjoying themselves, and it looked great. I remember just looking in, I was going to say goodbye, and walking out, and a little girl, 12 years old, walked past me. Never met her before in my life. And she walked past, and I was like, hi, as I say to everybody. She smiled, and then stopped, and then walked back and says, can I talk to you a moment? So I was like, yes. You know what it's like when a 12-year-old girl asks to speak to you. You're terrified. It's like, okay, make sure somebody can see me here. Let's sit here where your teacher can watch me. So you're sitting doing that, and she sat down, she was all happy, smiley, and all of a sudden, her face changed. And she just began to cry. I says, why does God allow suffering in this world? And immediately I assumed that something really bad had happened in her life. But it hadn't actually. Not that it was nothing, but nothing really significant had happened. It was just as she observed the world, she was wrecked with, why does God allow this? If there's a God, and I'm told that there is a God, why does he allow this to happen? Many of our young people are struggling with big questions like this. You all know that young people cope with questions, especially in teenage years. They're asking, who am I? Where do I fit in? What difference can I make? And more they're asking these questions now. But also apologetic questions about why does God allow suffering? Why has God allowed this to happen? Why has God allowed coronavirus, Ukraine war, monkeypox, anything? Why has God allowed all this to happen? What's going on? We need to equip ourselves to be able to answer those questions, not in deep theological questions, but pointing them to God's word. They're taking the time where we can explain it at their age group. So those of you working with young people, you need to listen and be patient. And you need to be able to answer those questions and help them and encourage them. Right, moving on, because I know time is also moving on. Next thing is, young people are disconnected. Okay? For all of us, the biggest issue in lockdown was our disconnect, where we didn't get to see people or spend time with them. Now, to a degree, that's fixed because you're back at school, you're back at work, you're back at church. It's great. But for some, there is still that disconnect, still that loneliness. And we're disconnected in different ways. The first way is this, our relationships. Young people are difficult. I've said earlier on about the idea of not being able to make friends, new friends, the social difficulties that there are there. And many of them are really struggling to connect, really struggling with people. I see lots of different faces here, and I don't know what lockdown was like for you. I don't know what it's like for your teenagers or those you know. Some of them thrived in lockdown. They had a wonderful family. They had a wonderful time at home. For others, that was not the case. Some of them were in situations of abuse. Some of them were in difficult homes where they were clashing with their parents, as teenagers do. And it was tough for them and really, really difficult. Many of them maintained an online friendship and relationship with others, but many others weren't speaking to anyone, had no contact, and they felt even more lonely. They're disconnected in their relationships, but they're also disconnected sometimes in our church and with the church. See, for those young people who are Christians, I'm assuming that many of you in church settings have provided something for them. There was some way for her to have online church available. That was great for the first few weeks. But I'm sure you all discovered that the viewings began to drop. Or you also probably discovered that you began to flick maybe to another YouTube channel and to watch another church, maybe a bigger one with a bigger budget and better cameras and everything else, and all of a sudden you weren't focusing on the same amount. Maybe you ran your youth group or whatever on Zoom. That was great. So it was, and again, it was really, really good for a while. But quite often, I'm not sure if it was just me speaking to our youth group, but I could see them listening to me, but I also knew they were playing Fortnite on the other side because you could see their eyes focusing at this point. There's been a number of us have become disconnected to the church like that because we've been watching other church services. We haven't really been near our own. And some, I'm sure church leaders in here will probably acknowledge, maybe some haven't come back to the churches as a result of all of that. The issue is that many of our young people have lost all sense of what the local church actually is. They've lost the fact that it's not just about a performance on a stage or on a camera, but it's actually a community of believers together where they're growing with people of different age groups and learning, and they've lost that whole vision of what the church is. There's a disconnect with the church. There's also a disconnect with non-church young people. So I'm speaking from a point of view where CEF, our vision and goal is to reach out to unreached people. And I don't know about what it's like in your youth ministries, but we had a number of unsaved and unchurched young people and children would have come to many of our groups. But quickly they began to drift off because the parents weren't encouraging them onto the screens. The parents weren't telling them, you have to be on at a certain time. And soon they forgot about it. And a number of them never even returned. And that's been tough. And so it's hard. It's great to disciple, and online stuff was great for discipling, but it was tough for the unsaved and unchurched. Here's another description. So we've got anxiety, questioning, disconnected. Here's a phrase which I didn't know how to write this. I'm going to say undercooked, okay? I wasn't sure how to title it, but basically what I mean is our young people haven't experienced or gone through the same experiences they would have in a normal setting. Over the past 2 years, they haven't grown and matured in the way they would by dealing with normal day-to-day issues. The immaturity is being noticed in schools, but it's also how they interact and deal with each other. But spiritually speaking, we're discovering a lot more of our young people are more shallow. They haven't grown spiritually the way they should have. I firmly believe that between the age of 14 and 17 are crucial years for a young person in their development as far as spiritual is concerned. Because it moves from being the faith that they were taught as a child by their parents to one that they really own before they go to university or wherever out into the world. Because if they don't really own the faith and learn to study for themselves, learn to grow for themselves, get involved in a church, they go to university and they have the big bad world and they face everything and they go out on it. But some of our young people have missed that and they haven't grown the way they should. And what we have discovered is many of them then are not interested in service or being involved in doing the things we want them to be. Last one is this, and it's confused. They don't know what to think. They're so anxious because they're asking so many questions, they're disconnected and they're struggling. And the foundation of it all is they just don't know what to think. Some of them are angry at the authorities for taking away and damaging their education, taking away their hopes and dreams. The reality was for many of the young people, lockdown or COVID wasn't a massive threat for them. And in some of their eyes, they felt that they were punished for an older generation to keep them safe. And at the start, everybody agreed with that, but then some of them maybe are getting resentful with it. And they're not sure what to happen. They're also worried about the economy, what's going to happen with that, and the resentfulness because of all of it. They're just confused. So how do we minister to them? Very quickly, I'm going to give you some ideas. You can disagree with me, talk to me afterwards. Here's some suggestions I'll have for you on how we can do it. And these are only suggestions. I am not right on everything. Please. First one's this. The future is not online. Technology has been increased at a rapid pace, okay? And we have always been debating in ministry how much we should use technology. Now, please do not stop going to Brian's seminar later on. It's important. You need to go to listen about technology. But what I'm saying is, while our young people love gaming, while they love FaceTiming each other, we have learned over this past while that online ministry is not the only way forward. It is a way that we need to use. We need to utilize it, but it is not and should not be the majority of our work. What we need to do is we need to actually be face-to-face with them. I'm sure we were all the same. When we did online ministry, it was different. I would come down to Blanchardstown every other Sunday evening and run with a little group. All of a sudden, I didn't need to drive 1.5 hours to reach Blanchardstown. I didn't need to spend the time there and drive back up. I just turned on the computer, and Roz and Giovanna and others that were here, they were all sitting there. I spent 45 minutes or 1 hour. I turned the computer off. I could put my feet up and make a cup of tea. It was great. But yet it wasn't great because we didn't actually get to spend the time together. And it's just lovely. Like, technology can still be used in a wonderful way. We did a camp back in January. We had 90 teenagers. It was fantastic. But in the morning of the camp, they all had to do a COVID test before they came. 5 of them tested positive and couldn't come. So we added them onto a Zoom call, and they took part in the meetings and some of the main activities. And those who were kept at home were still able to be involved a little bit. But we need to see people. We see this in the Bible. Look at Paul. What did he say? He said to the church in Thessalonica, he says, so being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also ourselves, because you've become very dear to us. Ministry for Paul wasn't just about giving knowledge. He wanted and desired the presence of those he was sharing with. Look again later on, it says, but since we were torn away from you, brothers, for a short time, in person, not in heart, we endeavoured the more eagerly and with great desire to see you face to face. Look at John, 2 John 12. Though I have much to write you, I'd rather not use paper and pen. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk to you face to face so that our joy may be complete. Paper and pen wasn't enough. Zoom and FaceTime's not enough. John was longing to see them face to face. Why? Because our physical presence has an enormous impact. Last reference, Acts chapter 28. Paul's talking here about the brothers who encouraged him. What does he say? And look at the last line. On seeing them, Paul thanked God and took courage. That's the impact, physical being together. Look at today. I don't know what churches you're from. I'm not sure how many of you have this amount of people in your church. I'm sure some of you don't. Isn't it encouraging to see that there are other believers standing firm in the faith, wanting to reach the children of Ireland? It's encouraging, and it helps us and builds us up. Quickly, because the clock is beating me, okay? Next one is, the future's smaller. COVID sped up something that was already happening with Generation Z. It used to be that the big stage events with hundreds and hundreds and maybe thousands of pounds were being put into them, big flashy programs. But more and more it's becoming smaller. Now, that does not mean that a big stage production is not right. They are definitely great, and we continue to want to see those happening more and more. But more and more, it's about the small groups meeting together. And that's you in your church, in your home, gathering a few teenagers together and meeting with them and going to a coffee shop and spending time with them and actually coming together in smaller groups, especially when people are anxious, in a safe place, and helping them to explore their gifts. This is actually the thing for the Church of Ireland now, is the smaller groups and building together and growing and being invested in. And what does that look like? Well, actually, it furthers on, because the future is no longer about making programs, but it's about making disciples. It always was about that. But sometimes we come to conferences like this and we look for the magic bullet. There's going to be this one program that's going to save our church, it's going to save our youth group, it's going to sort all of that out. No, it's not. We're called to go make disciples, and that means you giving yourself, investing your time in them, and coming and helping. Doesn't mean we don't look at strategies. Doesn't mean we don't think about how to do things wisely. But it's actually about coming and making disciples. I read earlier the Great Commission. You know yourselves that in the actual original Greek, the word go isn't the key word. The actual phrase means as you go. Going is assumed. It says as you go, you make disciples. Many of our young people are lost. Some of them spiritually lost. But even those who are believers, they're just lost at the moment. And they need discipled. How do we disciple them? Number one, first and foremost, is the church. And we need to get our young people into the church. They must be there in the local church, not on YouTube, not sitting at home. They must be there each week in the church, where they learn from different age groups and intergenerational, and they're supported in developing that. Outside of that, yes, your youth group supplements that and helps that. But they need to be in the church, in the main body. But also, you can look at JYC groups or other youth challenge groups or other organisations where you have youth groups coming together and they're being discipled. And the third way is this. I was chatting to, I'm going to pick on Job earlier on, mentoring. I was chatting to the guys earlier on, there's mentoring going on. That's what we need to be doing. People, same sex, same era as such, or not, and just meeting. I'm picking randomly on different people as I see them here. I see Claire in the back. I was sitting beside Claire's brother the other day, and he was telling me about how he is being mentored by a guy. They go and do ministry, and they're in the car journey for 1 hour, once a month, I think it is. And the reason he does that is to be mentored, to be encouraged. It's by somebody who's 30 years older than him in just investing. And sometimes it'll be deep. Sometimes it'll maybe be about football and about how Liverpool lose the Champions League. And other things, I don't know what it'll be about. But it's about investing time. Listen, you may feel that you're not adequate or not possible to do that. You can talk, you can listen, you can drink coffee, you can drink tea. You can just spend time with someone. Invest in them, listen to them, and let them know that you care. I often refer to one of our JYC groups. It's a junior youth challenge group we have for 11 to 15-year-olds. And the two leaders, one of them is my father, one of them is another lady in the church. She's 60 and he's 71. And they're dealing with 11 to 15-year-olds. And the young people love them. Not because they're cool, because they're not. Not because they're relevant, because they're not. Not even because they're great speakers, because they're not. Please don't record that. I'm not saying that. But because they love them and they care for them and they're interested in them. Last, the future is about relationships, yes. But relationships centered on God's word. Youth ministry post-pandemic is going to be difficult, but don't fall into the trap of just spending time with young people. Use our time to invest in teaching them God's word and build on the foundations of God's word. They need to know theology. They need to know why they should be watching certain things, not watching others. They need to know the importance of ecclesiology of the church. They need to know about going out and reaching the children of Ireland. They need to know these things. How do we do it? Not by standing shouting at them, by sitting beside them with God's word and showing them it all. We are seeing a lot of young people who have gone through and are going to be struggling with anxiety, mental health, all of that. We need to help them to be resilient, to be able to build it up so they know how to deal with issues when they come, because life is difficult. We need to teach them that they're rooted in God's word. We want to learn from it so their relationship may grow, with God may grow, and as a result of that, they'll want to influence and impact others. All that requires of us is us investing our time in smaller groups, maybe not necessarily big numbers, just investing continually in them. The past 2 years have been tough, but this is a time to rebuild. But don't make the same mistake of just going back and picking up and doing exactly what you did before. Things are different. So look at it. Look at yourself. You're different. Doesn't mean you stop. Just means things you do things differently. The young people are different. So we adapt. And our ministry needs to be a little bit different. That doesn't mean you don't keep doing what you did. You just may need to look at it in a different light and change some things. In my thoughts, and from what I'm reading, that's how we go about ministering to young people post-pandemic. I think we have about 3 minutes left. My apologies, I meant to give you about 10 minutes for questions. If anybody has anything, speak away, ask questions. I don't think I'll have all the answers, or if you have any thoughts you want to add of something I've missed, please do so. And then if anybody wants to chat afterwards, I'm about. Good man. Oh, no, thank you. Thank you.
Pray that God will help us to go and meditate on this. Not something you rush.
Yeah.
The question I have is, what are the best ways you can get, because the biggest point I got is mentoring, discipleship, very key.
Mm-hmm.
To get people to church. My greatest concern in the last 2 years is that it's like the church is sleeping. Even though when the pandemic we can change nothing,
Mm-hmm.
but now that it's over, the restaurants are open, the hospitality, everything is open. Churches are open, but people are open.
Yeah, fair enough.
What can we do apart from praying, fasting? What are other little things you can suggest to do to get people back to God?
Okay, so first of all, if it's people who maybe you know who have been there before, My suggestion at the moment, you guys at the back shout at me when I need to stop, okay? My suggestion would be maybe even to target 2 or 3 people. Pinpoint, say, 3 or 4 people that you know, and make it a point of saying, would you come out, be it McDonald's, be it for coffee, and just talk. It depends if they're a Christian or not a Christian. Again, at a conference I was at just before COVID, I was speaking to a guy, he was a speaker, David Helm. Some of you will know him from America. And he has a little program called Reading the Bible Together. And literally it is reading the Bible together. And it's basically saying he always encouraged to meet 3 people. One of them, an unbeliever, someone who's not a Christian at all. Someone, then secondly, who is a young believer. And then someone who you want to disciple more. And just meeting, but with a purpose, and say, I'd like to meet with you once a week. Go out for coffee, I'll buy you breakfast, whatever it is. I'd just like to read the Bible together. And actually, let's talk about it. Let's think about what Christianity is. And he worked through the Gospel of Mark at that point in time and would encourage people to do that. So they have a little book called 1-to-1, I think is what the name of it is, David Helm. So he has a program in that, so I would encourage that. I also just would encourage you to maybe see a couple of people and meet them. I'm going to be really rude and bad here and say Job, who I met outside, is mentoring, I know, within this. What would you sort of do if you were mentoring someone? Sorry, I'm really picking you on that one. And I've only met you just. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, good. Yep, sorry, at the back. Yes, yes, there is. And our danger is we need to be careful. The young people can go on YouTube very quickly and can look at other things, and they may be biblical, they may not be, and they can be influenced by others outside of it. But yes, I think what we need to do is to show them a little bit. There's an interest in prophecy, number one, but we need to show them a little bit about how God is in control and about how this is what God is planning and doing, and the key part of it being ready. But yes, I'm 100% in that. I'm being rushed because I'm being shouted at, waved at the back here. Come and speak to me, please. I'll be here over lunch. Come and talk as much as you wish on that one. I don't have all the answers. I know I didn't fully answer those questions, but thank you so much.